Welcome to Hard to Beat, the show that takes on winning the sports biz game, working in the industry, sponsorships, venues, sport marketing sales. We cover it all. This week, we are brought to you by 920 Travel Concierge, the very best in corporate and personal travel concierge services. And now, here is our host, Norman Leach.
Well, welcome to Hard to Beat, the show about the business of sport. Up first today, we are lucky to have Kara Brake, the general manager of the Medicine Hat Exposition and Stampede in Medicine Hat, Alberta. And for those international listeners, that's in Canada. So the Exhibition and Stampede has been entertaining Albertans for over 134 years and just announced a major new expansion. And that's what we want to talk to Kara about today. So Kara is the first woman to be the general manager for the Exhibition and Stampede in that whole 134 years and has an extensive sport and event management background. She's been involved with 2016 Alberta Winter Games as the general manager. She was part of the 2017 Special Olympics in Alberta in the Summer Games. She is a manager with the Medicine Hat Sport and Event Council, the director of marketing for the 2019 World Under-17 Hockey Challenge, a deep breath, and a member of the Medicine Hat College Program Advisory Council for Sport and Events Management. Wow, what an introduction. Kara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's a very stellar resume to have. So what was one of the things, before we get started, but what was one of the things you liked best about doing all of those? What's the thing that drew you to this industry?
Yeah, I mean, have had such an awesome opportunity to be involved in so many different events. And from a young age, I loved being involved in the events. I loved being involved in the planning side of things. And so when I was 19, I actually got a role as the regional director for the Summer Games in Medicine Hat, or for Medicine Hat in Southern Alberta here. And so it was such a privilege to do that. I did 1 year and I was hooked. I was hooked on sports and events, and one role just kind of rolled into the next. And now here I am as general manager of one of the largest events that Medicine Hat puts on every year.
Good. Well, that's a great segue. It's just like you knew this was coming. So tell us a little bit about the Exhibition and Stampede. Again, we have an audience around the world, so give us a little bit of context of what it's all about.
Yeah, so it is the largest event that's held in Medicine Hat annually. We see about 40,000 people through our grounds each and every year. It's a 4-day festival that includes a midway, exhibits, a rodeo, night shows, lots of different kind of activities for people to get involved in, kids activities, family activities, lots of different things that people can do. And like I said, we see about 40,000 people, which in looking at the size of Medicine Hat, when we're about 65,000 people, it's a lot of people that we draw out to our event during those 4 days.
Yeah, that's a great percentage turnout of the potential audience. Wow. So you've just announced a big expansion. Some exciting news. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so we just announced our shareholders and board of directors have approved us moving forward to create a new grandstand and convention center. So we're calling it the Event Center, but it does include us demolishing one side of our grandstand and putting up a brand new grandstand, and then the other side will get a major renovation. And then tied to that is going to be a convention space. So we've got a large banquet room with meeting rooms attached, breakout rooms attached, a full-size commercial kitchen, a large atrium. We've got food vendors that are attached to that, retail vendors. So lots of things that are available to take place in this building, and lot of potential for lots of different types of events to happen as well.
So is this something that Medicine Hat just didn't have as a convention center, or are you replacing something?
Yeah, so it kind of started in the fact that we did need to replace that north grandstand. It's been there since 1966, so it's a wood structure, needs a lot of renovations, and so that's kind of where they started this conversation, was that we need to knock this down. And then when we started looking at it, we heard from the community that we are in need of a convention space. Right now in Medicine Hat, we do have one other convention space, but it doesn't have a lot of breakout rooms. And so that was something that the community was lacking. And so when we started looking at this project and the potential that it could have, we worked in that convention space and the breakout rooms to add another additional space for Medicine Hat to attract those national and provincial conventions.
Perfect. So the audience is interested in the how of things, how things got done. So can you give us a bit of an idea? Clearly, you haven't mentioned the budget. What's the budget for this first?
Yeah, so right now we've estimated it to be about $20 million.
Okay.
And so with inflation, we might end up being a little bit closer to that 25 million. But right now our goal is to raise that $20 million.
Okay. So can you tell us how you are doing that? I mean, again, we want to know sort of how does it work? Like what's the job involved? What are you doing? What are your staff doing to help do that? What's the role of the board of directors? Anything you can tell us would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't something that was just dreamed up overnight. It's been quite a long process. So there was a committee formed about 11 months ago with the board of directors formed. And so they created a committee, and that committee really started looking at the research of things. What does our community need? What does it look like? What are important aspects that the building needs to have? For example, one of the things that we heard constantly was, if we're going to put beer stands on the second or third floor, we need an elevator that has access to put a pallet in that with a pallet jack so that we can get that beer up there and we're not carrying case by case to the second and third floor. So a lot of research went into that. Next steps for us being a board of directors is we had to look at how we start doing some concept drawings and get an engineer involved. We were really lucky to have a retired engineer on our committee. And so he was able to help us put some floor plans together, blueprints, preliminary blueprints. And then we took those and we were able to find somebody in Medicine Hat that could give us some concept drawings. And so we were able to put that together and then start working with contractors. And we were able to put one of a retired contractor on our committee as well. And so working with him, we were able to start getting some of those cost estimations for what the project would cost. We went to lots of other companies across Medicine Hat to find out cost-wise as well. And then we're able to kind of put together that budget of the 20 million. Following that, we got our staff together, and our staff has been involved through various different ways. Part of that interview process, part of putting together the presentations that we've done, putting together some of the numbers, and then moving forward, our staff will be much more involved in the next process. But we had to form a presentation and then take that presentation to our board of directors, who had to approve moving forward with the project. And then for us, next step was taking it to our AGM, to all of our shareholders, to be voted on to move forward, because it is quite a big project. It'll be probably for us one of the biggest or for me, one of the biggest projects that I see in my entire career here. So it's a big deal. And so our board of directors were very supportive of it. And then next up was going to the community and announcing that, hey, we are doing this. This is an exciting project. And we're really hoping that the community could get involved in it. And finally, our next steps will be finding the money.
Exactly, right? Always a challenge.
Absolutely.
So was there anything, set money aside, because we always know that's a challenge, but what else would you say was a challenge in getting this project to the stage you have it now? What was the biggest challenge?
I'd say the biggest challenge is that with us in the Stampede, we've got our board of directors is 12 people. We've got about 200 shareholders. So we have a lot of people that have a lot of different opinions and a lot of really great knowledge through our shareholder base and volunteer base. But it did mean that we had a lot of different opinions on where things should go and how things should work and how things should be placed. And so putting together the design of the building was actually quite difficult, because we did have so many different opinions. And so we had to kind of collect all of those. And then that's when we also decided to go to the community and ask for their opinions, and our staff and ask for their opinions. But even since we've released it, we've had lots of people that are like, oh, this door is in the wrong place, or you need to put this elevator over here. So there are a lot of opinions, and the tough part is doing the best you can to create a design that's going to work for the foreseeable future, and not knowing, like, some of the things that we didn't necessarily think about was technology and how much technology is going to change in the next 20, 30, 50 years, and how we incorporate those changes into a new building so that in 10 years, it's not obsolete.
Exactly. No, and we've seen that happen, right? Where put in the very best today, and within 3 to 5 years, you're starting to have to rip things out and replace them.
Yeah.
Last question. you've had a long career, or maybe not so long as mine, but you've had a long career anyway in the idea of running sports programs and things, or running sports events and those type of things. If someone's listening to this and says, hey, you know what, that's what I want to do, what's your best advice to them?
My best advice would be volunteer first.
Okay.
Volunteer in the different events that are going on locally, provincially, regionally, if you're not from Alberta and I'm talking provinces. But yeah, definitely get out there, volunteer, experience it, because it's way different being involved behind a screen than it is actually being out there and being involved. There's a lot of logistics that goes into hosting events. And it can be extremely stressful with things changing. It can be exciting. It can be emotional. So I'd say go out, experience it first. And if you love doing it, then keep doing it. The more you get involved, the more opportunities that are going to kind of fall into your lap. I ended up taking a business degree, which really helped to understand kind of the different aspects of the event, the financials, the technology side of things. So I would say if you're looking for some education to back that up, I know the college is looking at starting a new program as well for sport and events here in Medicine Hat. So that's always an option as well. But yeah, I would definitely, my biggest advice is go out there, get involved first, and make sure that you love it.
Great advice. Kara, thank you for your time today. It really is appreciated. We look forward to seeing how the project plays out.
Yeah,
so everybody, our
me.
guest has been Kara Brake, the General Manager of the Medicine Hat Exposition and Stampede in Medicine Hat, Alberta, in Canada. Kara, look forward to seeing you out in Medicine Hat. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today, our look back at the history of the sports business is brought to you by Creative Concepts Marketing, training, coaching, and leading the best marketers and salespeople around the world. Back in September of 1914 in Toronto, Ontario, Babe Ruth made the news. Yes, that Babe Ruth. The baseball legend hit his first professional home run at Hanlan's Point on Toronto Island, knocking in 3 runs. The budding southpaw pitcher also tossed a one-hitter that day as his Providence club blanked Toronto 9-0. And you wonder why I like Babe. There's no question that sports are changing. At this year's Olympics, in a bid to engage a younger audience, we saw skateboarding and rock climbing introduced for the first time. In the same vein, there's a constant discussion, not without dispute, as to whether esports should be accepted as an Olympic sport. To discuss that and other esport topics, we have Victor Lee. Victor is the president and co-founder of the Alberta Esports Association and has over 15 years of community building and leadership experience behind him. He's an instructor for Mount Royal University's Esports Management Program in Calgary, Canada. He's the manager for student community and engagement for the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Alberta. And he sits on the Industry Advisory Council for the Edmonton Screen Industries Office and the Community Initiatives Committee for the Edmonton Regional Innovations Network. Victor, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Yeah, and that's part of sort of my first question is, sports tripped off your tongue. Everybody has talked about sports forever, but this idea of esports is new for many people. Mm-hmm. So maybe as a kickoff to all of this, you can just talk a little bit about, please, what is esports? Can you give us a definition? And while you're doing that, tell us how you got involved.
Sure. That's a great segue. So esports just stands for electronic sports. So just like you have email, right? E-commerce, it's just electronic sports. And the reason it uses the sports is because it shares a number of similarities in terms of organized competition and how the sector operates. But I'm not here to make any arguments that we're physically on the same level as traditional sports, but at a very operational level. And at a competition level, it shares enough similarities that we take on that term, but being very clear that it's esports. So we're not making the argument that it's necessarily a traditional sport. And so for myself, I got my start well before the esports term was even really used in the mainstream. Myself, And my friends at the time, we were 14, 15, over 15 years ago, and we were just looking for more people to compete with. Back then, you couldn't play games online. And so in order to compete with other people and to play with other people, you needed to be in person. And so when I was 14 years old, I started organizing some tournaments. I spent a lot of time at my local library and ended up hosting some tournaments there. And then eventually these tournaments grew and grew and grew from being 20, 30 people at a library or in my parents' basement to eventually filling community halls and convention halls. And eventually we ended up becoming the largest esports event organizers in the province of Alberta, bringing together thousands of players across the province to compete at our events.
So I know that when we talk about sports, we're all fairly familiar with how you make money. Certainly, take NFL football, the players get paid, they get large amounts of money, they get sports sponsorships, they do all of those things. And that's sort of common knowledge. What's the business model for esports? Our audience is a business audience. How does it all work?
Yeah, for sure. So if you really just stepped away from the semantics around whether or not esports is a sport, and you really look at the business model level, you'll find that it's basically one-to-one. You would just you would replace the the volleyball or the basketball or the baseball bat with a controller or a mouse and keyboard, and ultimately it functions exactly the same. You have players who are sponsored by teams. They're just like NASCAR drivers. They're decked out in their jerseys with sponsor logos all over the place. And they themselves have their own brand. They compete for tournament prizings. Their teams compete for tournament prizings, whether it's a team esport or an individual esport. And now these events have grown to have significant prizings, upwards to millions and millions of dollars that these players are competing for. And likewise, we're ending up using the same stadiums that traditional sports are using. During the Beijing Olympics, we now utilize that for an esports tournament there, and now a number of these events are actually garnering larger audiences than traditional sports events.
So describe the average player. I mean, I don't want to go down the path of stereotypes, but I think when we see esports, you have a different vision of what that person, and maybe it's a completely incorrect version. Mm-hmm. So what does the average player look like? It seems to me you wouldn't age out of this sport.
No, I mean, you could play this for as long as you'd like. And the benefit as well is you're not at risk of any physical injuries that limits you from playing, into old age. It's very comparable to chess or poker in that sense, where there's a competitive component and you can play it for the rest of your life. And so in esports, really the audience is all over the place. It's an extremely accessible type of sport or type of organized competition in that we don't need gender divisions. Men, women, and all other identities are able to compete together. And likewise, the youth divisions are less pronounced in this event, in this sector as well. So you could have adults competing with kids at our events. You'll see kids as young as 7, and you'll get adults as old as 77 competing in some of our tournaments. But the added bonus, in addition to the raw accessibility of esports, is that it addresses an audience that goes under-recognized and under-acknowledged. For myself, the reason that I got into this space was because I'm asthmatic and I was limited in terms of what I could compete in school. And so in order for me to get the same level of community and competition and camaraderie, I found a way to compete and get that sense of mastery and that sense of belonging in an entirely different context. And likewise, that provides that opportunity for others that might have physical limitations or just simply are not interested in traditional sports, and offer them that opportunity to experience a lot of the same benefits of traditional sports.
So when we talk about the show Hard to Beat, we're talking about the world that exists beyond the playing field. So let's take your electronic playing field and go beyond that. What are the careers that are available in the e-gaming industry?
Yeah, for sure. So this is fairly nascent and it's still at a relatively emerging stage. So right now, once you compete, the lifespan for an esports professional is pretty short. There are limited opportunities for them really to leverage their experiences moving forward. Certainly, there's those who have a strong reputation and they can leverage that into becoming a content creator or a strong voice moving forward within the scene, maybe moving towards casting and commentators or working in the back end of the industry. But really, one of the goals that we're looking to provide within this space is building out that foundation and those pathways that are prevalent in traditional sports, but are currently gaps within esports. So as an example, with the Alberta Esports Association, we're looking to fill that void within our province to provide that governance and that structure to provide not only talent pipelines and talent pathways for kids to actually develop the skills to become esports professionals or work within the industry, but also to have pathways beyond their esports career.
So is there a training component? I mean, obviously you have to practice, because just like chess, as you referenced it, to like chess, clearly you have to practice. But is there a physical training part of being a good esport athlete?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, most people are moving towards just healthier living in general. Esports is not going to be as physically demanding as traditional sports would be, but maintaining a healthy diet, a healthy sleep schedule, and being active is all going to become a benefit for them as a competitor in that environment. And we actually have the privilege of working with a number of healthcare professionals within the space. There's been a number of sports performance psychologists, as well as psychologists in general, and health and wellness specialists, particularly those who specialize in hand therapy and ergonomics, that are now including esports clients within their clientele. And we actually work with a number of them that come from a professional sports development background and now are transitioning into working with esports players.
Cool. That's really interesting. I mean, you don't think of that when you're thinking about esports in general, is that there's a training component. So that's an interesting thought. So what, in your view, so you're co-founder of the association, what's the future for esports? And if you want to say the words Olympics, that's okay. But what's the future for esports, say over the next 5 or 10 years? Where do you see it going in? We can start with Alberta if you like, but our audience is around the world. So we're interested in sort of, how do you see this growing nationally and globally?
Sure. I mean, right now, the Asian markets lead over 50% of the esports international market right now. And it just hit the milestone of being a global billion-dollar industry. Wow. So really, the rest of the world is looking to catch up to where the Asian markets have gone. South Korea in particular has already established the Korean Esports Association over a decade and a half ago. And they were able to establish a very strong infrastructure for esports and to foster a very healthy development of the industry, and garnering government support. And they were televising esports well before esports was even being acknowledged here in North America in particular. So really, one of the goals is identifying the gaps between the rest of the world and where Asia is right now, and filling that gap, but as well taking it beyond. So what we're doing here in our region in Canada is doing exactly that with the Alberta Esports Association. We're garnering government support, public and private stakeholder support to really build that governing structure, much like you would have Hockey Alberta or other sports provincial associations. And likewise, it's to create that hierarchy and those pathways. So when esports is brought into the Olympics, how does Canada select its professional players? How does it select its representatives? And right now, there's really no infrastructure in place. The provinces aren't talking to each other. The country's not talking within itself. And so that's what we're building out right now. So we have ourselves here in Alberta, BC, Manitoba, Toronto, they're all underway. And actually, speaking of the Olympics, we have a very close relationship with past Olympian Charmaine Crooks. She's with the Canadian Esports Association. So it's a very burgeoning new network that's consolidating the Canadian associations for esports under its umbrella to build that natural pathway.
Well, so, we're, everybody in our audience is looking to get into the business of sports, whether it's regular sports or esports. You're the president of the association. If you were talking to somebody one-on-one or to a small group, what's your best advice to getting involved on the business side of esports, not the playing of the game, but the business side? What's your best advice?
For sure. Really just look at this as an amazing opportunity for an untapped market. We've been working with a number of sponsors and funders from endemic spaces that are pertinent for the world of gaming, like telecommunication service providers, energy drinks, computer retailers. And what they're seeing is just the raw viewership and the raw attention and participation that esports is getting. And so when you have viewership that's rivaling the Super Bowl, if you have a product that you're looking to sell and get in front of your immediate audience, you're going to want to jump on this. And so it's a great opportunity for corporate sponsors to get involved, much like they would get involved with traditional sports. So just like you would have Puma sponsoring a sporting event, you would also have TELUS sponsoring an esports event. And likewise, in terms of jumping in and supporting this scene now in North America, is particularly in Alberta and in Canada, we're at that nascent and emerging stage. We're just developing. Joining now will allow you to be an early market leader within this space and really be able to support the development moving forward as an early leader.
Oh, thank you. So I think that's about our time. Our guest has been Victor Lee, the president and co-founder of the Alberta Esports Association. Victor, thank you so much for giving us some of your time and for joining us here on Hard to Beat.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this week in sports business news, the NHL has approved the sale of patches, sponsorship patches on the team uniforms. It's a break of tradition. For a long time, players' uniforms were considered sacrosanct. We don't put patches on them. Could label everything else for a sponsor, including seats and the field itself, but not the players. Well, the NHL has decided it's a source of revenue. And certainly we're going to be seeing more and more opportunities to buy sponsorships on team jerseys. And why is it happening? Well, quite frankly, the world has changed. Manchester United, the soccer team out of Great Britain, makes $103 million from Adidas. They make another $65 million from TeamViewer, the jersey sponsor, $27 million from Kohler, their sleeve sponsor, a total of $195 million a year. So it's no question that teams are going to be adding more and more opportunities for sponsors to place their logos. For a long time, we considered too many logos a problem. And we kind of looked at NASCAR and said, how do you identify a single company out of all of those logos? And yet it worked. And the argument was because the cars came by the cameras so often, you had time to absorb it all. Well, we're seeing that today's sports fan, the younger sports fan, is no longer driven by single sponsors. They've grown up with a world of sponsorship flying at them all the time. And so the reality is they can sort all of that out. And for the teams, those millennials and those new fans are where the real money is. So the NHL has made its move. It's no question that even Major League Baseball has sold a sponsorship on umpires' uniforms. The national basketball teams are thinking about how can they put more logos out on the court. Not a lot of uniform space, but the court could now become an advertising backboard. And even the NFL is considering it because, well, if everybody else is going to do it, they can't possibly leave money on the table. There's going to be a lot of pushback. No question, not all fans agree with what is going on in terms of new sponsorship. But sponsorship is the way that teams have to survive. We're now seeing the number of people who are attending sports games going down dramatically and may stay down as teams have implemented anti-COVID regulations, including you have to show that you are fully vaxxed before you can even go to the stadium. If we look just simply at the numbers, that could indicate as much as a 50% decline in people attending sporting events in person because of the COVID restrictions. So if you don't have the fans in the seats and they're not buying beer and they're not eating popcorn, you've got to make up the money somewhere else. And that somewhere else is going to be in sponsorships. And it will change the look of sport. There will be people who oppose it, no question. Some fans will be very offended that their team's uniform, those classic uniforms, are now covered in sponsors' logos. The teams, of course, assure us that, well, it's not going to be like that. It's not going to cover everything. It is simply going to be discreet, but very prominent for the advertiser. And there's no advertiser in the world who's going to turn down that opportunity. So get ready get ready for the kind of viewing of sponsorships that we have not seen in the past. And it will create a whole new opportunity for teams to go out and sell those sponsorships and for companies to advertise what they have to sell to us. Don't know what it's going to turn out to in the end, but it's coming and we're going to have to accept that. Well, there's our show. Thank you again to Cara Brake, the General Manager of the Medicine Hat Exposition and Stampede, and Victor Lee from the E-Gaming Association for joining us today as our guests. Join us next time as we explore the business of sport on the Fired Up Network. And as Babe Ruth said, it's hard to beat a person who won't give up. See you soon.